I'm Carla Schaefer. This is the 2018 edition of my garden lookbook. It's a little project I undertake every winter in the process of making out my seed orders for the following year, and it gives me a chance to document my variety selections and talk a little bit about some of the special projects that are underway at the garden. I share garden space with my friend Art Larson. Together we have 4 plots at the Grow Food Northampton Community Garden in Florence, Massachusetts. We're Zone 5 on the USDA hardiness map, and our total growing area is about 1,000 square feet. So my main purpose is to give an overview of the variety selections that I've made this year for the garden and getting our seed catalog orders ready to go. But before I jump into that, I wanted to just go back to the broader considerations that go into those choices that relate to our goals and objectives for the garden as a whole. Our first priority is to create healthy soil, and we've been working on a number of techniques that feed into that, from cover crops and green manures to our rotation schedule, and there will be more about that coming up in a minute. We're also really taking an ecocentric view, which is to say we're trying to build a complete balanced ecosystem in our small space. So we have pollinator plants, perennials tucked in here and there, and tried to create an environment that is attractive to insects, birds, and also provides aesthetic beauty for ourselves. We take cosmic forces into account, and by that I mean that we're thinking about the relationship of the plant to the season. I'll talk a little bit about how we're now thinking of the year as a 2-season cycle instead of a 4-season cycle, and what that means for seed selection and timing of planting, etc. We're prioritizing open pollinated and open source seed initiative seeds whenever we can. There are some instances that I'll point out where we do choose F1 varieties that deal with particular problems that we have in our garden. We match plant density to soil needs and capacity. That means that we're planting intensively, but we're doing that carefully so as to maintain our soil fertility and to also maximize yields. So that's an ongoing matter of experimentation and experience to find out the density that seeds do well at, and we get the balance between getting a lot of plants into our small space but giving them the nutrition that they need so that they yield well. We maximize yield through variety selection, and this often entails looking for compact strains of the plants that we grow that we can plant closer together, or plants that we can harvest at a young stage rather than waiting for them to grow to full maturity. For example, kale, we look for varieties that we can harvest small and plant them very densely and then cut and come again type harvesting, rather than taking up a lot of space to let those plants grow to maturity. And another goal of ours is to expand our diets by including storage and processing crops, as well as oil seeds and grains that can augment our food supplies throughout the colder months of the year when we can't actively work in the garden. Our garden is laid out in 4 squares, actually 4 identical quadrants that allows us to do a 4-year rotation for most of our crops, surrounded by a border on all sides that has its own rotation plan, as well as 4 trellised gates that give us a chance to go vertical with some crops. One of the main projects that we have initiated for this year and that we're really excited about is our effort to develop a multi-species, walkable, low-growing living pathway selection. And I've documented that in another set of slides, so I won't go into a great detail here. But we're hoping to end up with something that looks a little bit like what you're seeing in these pictures. That's a combination of flowers and herbs that are hardy enough to walk on. We will mow them a couple of times each summer to keep them tidy, and we'll trim the edges of the pathways periodically to keep them from spreading into our growing beds. But the idea here is to provide a soil cover that supports the growth of our microbiome that doesn't get disturbed. These are all perennial plants, and that provides an inoculant for the beds that we are cultivating a little more frequently. We've looked at over 160 different species and varieties so far, and we've selected about 25 of them to try out this summer. It's been a bit of an expensive project to get started with, as you can imagine, since these are all perennial plants. So it's going to take us a few years to actually build out our seed stock. We also have our herb collection. Some of these are annuals, some of them perennials. All of them we've been growing, but I do have a couple of new things to add this year. One is the dwarf sage that you see here, which will hopefully give us a more compact sage variety for our tiny space. And then the rosemary. Up until now, I've always grown my rosemary in pots so that I could bring it indoors for the winter, but I've identified a variety that is hardy and should survive our winters even if they go well below 0. So we're going to get one of those plants this year, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it does. Seasonally, we sort of view our garden in terms of 2 seasons. The vernal garden, which is the crops that grow when the day length is increasing. So that's all our spring and summer vegetable crops. And then from summer solstice onward, when the day length is decreasing, we call that the hibernal garden. And I'll talk a little bit more about those selections later on in the slide set. One of the first things we plant in the spring is peas. This year we're growing alderman, also known as telephone pea, which is a variety that was grown by my grandpa back in the early 1960s. And I remember them well, growing up his trellises. We grew sugar snap pea on the trellises last year, and they were lovely, but we're hoping to move towards a better crop of shelling peas this year, so we're going to do alderman instead. We're also growing a fava bean, which is half food crop and half cover crop for us. We plant it early along with the peas, and it'll occupy some of our beds until we get ready to do the later season successions. Masterpiece Green Long Pod is a variety that has good flavor for eating, large beans, and so we're anxious to try out those broad beans. Shallots will grow again. We had a fabulous crop of shallots last year, and these will come from Dixondale Farms, which is where I've gotten all of my allium plants for a number of years now. Also from Dixondale, we'll get our main storage onion seedlings, and the variety we're using is Copra. It's an extremely long storing variety. That's a long day variety, so it's great for our New England seasons. And it's known to store for up to 12 months if it's been properly cured. Tadorna is our leek variety this year. It's a new variety for me. It's an open pollinated variety, and I'm anxious to try it out. We do a steady supply of cutting greens from the garden that we eat young, and they're cut and come again. This Tuscan baby leaf kale is a new variety to grow this way, and we like it because it's got that curly leaf, compact leaf, and that'll be a nice combination with the smooth leaf Groninger blue kale that we've been growing. The Blau Groninger kale I was really hoping to get hold of, but I've now discovered that the seed is not going to be available this year. So this is a place marker. Hopefully I'll be able to get some for next year. In the meantime, we'll continue to grow the Groninger blue collared kale that we originally got from Fertile Valley Seeds out in Oregon. That's been a great little kale for us. We plant it densely and cut it young, but if we let it get overgrown and have to harvest it when it gets big, it's great that way too. You may remember that we started our strawberry project a year and a half ago with these Fairfax strawberries. This is a rare variety, one of the earliest strawberries that were bred for flavor. They're known as one of the most flavorful strawberries. We started out with 6 plants. Last spring we had a nice little crop of strawberries from the 6 plants, but not very many of them. But the plants really did well. We got a lot of runners, and we propagated the runners by pinning them down into plastic Dixie cups that we'd cut the bottoms out of and put them right in the ground. So in the fall we were able to pull up the Dixie cups and transplant those baby plants into a new bed, and we now have a full 15-foot bed of the Fairfax strawberries. Another ongoing project is our cooking oil effort. We grew oilseed sunflower last year, and it did well, but it created a lot of shade in the garden, which was a little bit problematic. And in doing research, another oilseed crop that I discovered that has a really high yield per square foot is poppy seed oil. And so we're going to give it a try this year with this variety called Elka. We'll plant a full 15-foot bed of the poppies. They should be beautiful and a great pollinator plant to have in the garden as well. Lettuce is another crop that we keep successions going all summer long, and our focus is on these compact heat-tolerant lettuces during the main summer season. Little Gem is a butterhead lettuce that has been very popular in Great Britain and in Europe Not so common here in the US maybe, but we look forward to growing it. I've seen on cooking shows that they'll often cut these in half, just like you see here, and put them face down in a frying pan and actually sear the lettuce heads before they serve them. Haven't tasted it that way, but it sounds interesting. Johnny's offers 3 different varieties that fall into the same mini bib lettuce slot, and we'll give these a try too. They'll give us a little variety in color, leaf color, and shape. This one, Alan Chadwick's Rodan Loose Leaf, I'm very excited to get hold of. It was developed by Alan at the Covelo Garden back in the years when I was living in that area, and I've always wanted to be able to grow it, so I'm excited to find the seed. It's also a compact lettuce. It's also heat tolerant. Pomegranate Crunch is a small romaine lettuce that was recommended in a newsletter article that I read this past summer, and so it got added to my list to try. Still working on a set of radish varieties that I like. Cincinnati Market is a long red radish that is supposed to be mild, and of course the long roots give you more product for the amount of space that you devote in the garden, so that's a nice aspect, and we're looking forward to slicing down these beautiful pink roots. Holmes Royal Red. This is another mild radish that's has a good texture and a juicy bulb. And that'll be a new one to try for us. Our summer carrot, I'm moving away from the yayas that I've been growing for the last 4 years. Those are great carrots, but in my effort to always look for open pollinated varieties first, I thought it would be nice to try these Hilmars and see how they do for us. They look great in the picture, and I'm hoping they do as well as they look. We grew the baby ball beets last summer, and we really liked them. They're compact, they're harvestable when they're small, after just 3 to 4 weeks, and some of them that we didn't get harvested got left until I think almost Thanksgiving. They were a good 3 inches in diameter, and we brought them in and roasted them, and they were still just as delicious. So we like that variety, and we're going to stick with it. I have 2 varieties of celery. I didn't get to try them last year because I ended up having to buy seedlings. Just didn't have enough space to start all my seeds indoors at home. But this year I'm hoping to get these started. So the Ventura, this is a biodynamically grown seed, and it's an old celery variety that was developed for the market industry in California in the early days of the California Central Valley. And it's been around for a long time, but not grown very much recently. Open pollinated. We're also going to try out Command, another open pollinated variety that you can see has a nice stocky structure to it. And it'll be interesting to grow the 2 varieties side by side and be able to compare them. Celeriac is an ongoing project for me. I've grown celeriac for a number of years now. I've never achieved the size roots that I would like, that I dream of. So we're going to continue. I'm hoping that as our fertility improves in our garden plot, and we master its particular needs for water and nutrients that will get better production. But celeriac is wonderful. It stores all winter and gives you that nice celery flavor for roasting and for soups and stews and even grated salads. The cucurbit family, which is all of the squashes and cucumbers, have presented the greatest challenges for us in the community garden, where there's very little control over what your neighbors are growing and how they're handling disease. And the downy and powdery mildew problem has just been terrible. So we're on a mission to find resilient varieties of these plants. This is a biodynamic variety, and it's been bred for disease resistance over a number of years, open pollinated, and I'm anxious to give it a try, and we'll see how it does. Asthea is the variety that I grew last year. It was marketed as being disease resistant, and in fact it was. It was the most resistant summer squash that I had in the garden. I like its compact growing habit, and I think it's quite an open plant, and I think that's one reason that it doesn't succumb to the mildew, because it dries out quickly and doesn't stay moist. It was also a very nice eating zucchini. Green Tiger is another F1 that I thought I'd try out. Also has excellent tolerance for powdery mildew and downy mildew, and it'll give us a little variety too, and with those nice stripy skins. Cucumbers, in my research, found reference to this variety, Eureka, which a number of seed companies have in their catalogs as the most disease-resistant cucumber on the market today. So how could I not give it a try? We'll see how it does. Another thing I like about it is that it can be harvested small for pickles, and also used as a slicing cucumber after it grows out. So it's nice to have that dual purpose out of a single plant when we don't have very much space to devote to each crop. Marketmore is the old classic cucumber for New England. We grew it last year. It did quite well for us, and we'll give it another chance this year too. Silver Cloud cannellini beans I didn't grow last year, but I did grow the year before. They were a great success, and we really enjoyed eating them. So they're back in the mix this year. I've managed to set aside a full bed for them. The first year we grew them, we got almost 7 pounds, maybe a little over 7 pounds for the 15-foot bed. So it's a nice productive crop for us, and it cooks up beautifully in the wintertime. And we'll continue the landrace soup bean project. We started this last year by selecting 5 varieties from the Little Easy Bean Network. That's a seed bank project. We can request five varieties. We grow them out. We send 60 seeds back to the seed bank, and we can keep the rest for our own purposes. So what you're seeing in the picture here are the varieties we grew last year, and we have plenty of seed to do this again, and we're now adding 5 more seeds this year. So on the bottom row here are the last 5 are the new seeds that we'll add this year. So these are all bush beans, and they're all intended to be dry beans. And we're pleased with the little selection of color and varieties and how they look when they're dry. We grew the Carmen peppers last year. They were very successful, and we'll do them again this year. They're great for roasting. Um, we got nice big peppers on our plants, and they also did well in the freezer for winter use. We're adding these little tiny red bell peppers called little bells, um, which is another open pollinated pepper, and we're anxious to see how it does. Should be a nice compact plant that's highly productive for us. I have failed to put in the hot pepper variety, and I haven't quite decided which one we're going to grow this year, but I may do the fish peppers again that we had last year. They were successful, and they're a really nice pepper to cook with. They're not super, super hot, but they definitely add um, a bit of heat and a nice flavor to our winter cooking. Slender borage or creeping borage is a plant that I spent a lot of time searching for last year. Was able to source it finally from a small seed house in Great Britain. Um, this is a low-lying, flat form of the borage plant that we're planting under our tomatoes to deter tomato hornworm. And it's also has edible flowers and leaves. For our tomatoes, we're going to grow the Moritans again. This was part of the Jersey tomato project out of Rutgers University, one of the early varieties that was bred for the cannery market in New Jersey. As you can see, it's a really dense tomato, made fabulous sauce for us last fall, and turned out to be quite resistant to early blight and septoria leaf spot. Old Brooks is a new open pollinated variety for us. Again, it fits in with our focus on processing tomatoes. It's also resistant to early blight, and we're hoping that it will do well for us. Principe Borghese is an Italian tomato that was traditionally used to make sun-dried tomatoes. Um, it's a little tomato that packs a huge punch of flavor, and since we have access to a very nice food dehydrator, that'll give us dried tomatoes for our winter larders. Jasper is another um, early blight and septoria leaf spot resistant cherry tomato that will give us a salad tomato for the summer. Our flower corn project continues on with the second year of the Papa's White. We grind that into flour corn. The first year we grew flour corn, we got 7 pounds of ground flour from one bed. Last year our crop didn't do as well, so we're going to give the Papa's White a second chance this year and see if it'll come through for us. If not, then we'll be trying another variety for the flour corn. Now for a couple of varieties to grow vertically on our gateways. What you're seeing here in this picture to the left is the winter squash that I grew on the trellis last year. Boy, it really took over that trellis and we couldn't even walk through the gate after a while. And in fact, I felt like it was not as happy on the trellis as it would have been on the ground. This variety likes to send out roots at the nodes, and so I think it would have done better growing on a hill on the ground. So we're going to transition to something new for this coming year. Here's the winter squash. It's honey nut, which is a fairly new variety that was bred at Cornell University. Great flavor, and it loves to climb. I think it'll do better on the trellis for us um, than the others that we've tried. On the other side of that same gate, we're going to plant a few of these delicatas. This strain, the Zeppelin strain, is a particularly flavorful one that comes from wild garden seed. One gate is going to be devoted to summer eating beans, snap beans, and we're going to put green beans on one side and yellow beans on the other side of that gate. Fasoled is our green variety, has these lovely mauve flowers. Kentucky Wonder wax bean will be our other pole variety. That's a yellow bean, again, that I have memories of from my early childhood and my grandpa's garden and our family gardens. It has a brown seed inside, and so it tends to be more flavorful than some of the other yellow snap beans. We'll also do our Christmas limas again. That's our Christmas lima gate from about early September last summer. We got a good crop of Christmas limas, and they turned out to be really resistant to Mexican bean beetle. When all the other beans were getting decimated, those weren't touched, and they weren't touched until after the other beans were ripped up out of the garden and the beetles didn't have any place to go. So that's nice for a pole bean because it's not as easy to protect the pole beans from insects. Here's just a little fun hanging basket experiment. The picture on the right of the red geraniums peeking out from the beans is from my garden last summer, and I have those hanging, self-watering hanging baskets that go on the trellises. And I thought I would like to use those for some things that are not hardy that need to be brought in the wintertime because they're so easy to lift on and off. And this fruity teucrium took my eye. It's a perennial plant. It's a good pollinator plant, and it should be pretty against the beans or whatever we're planting on the trellises. Another thing we do in the summertime is, and early fall, is plant cover crops. And here's an introduction to what we're doing there. Last fall, we experimented with this soil builder mix that comes from terroir seeds, which is down in Texas, I think. But we were really impressed with the quality of this mix. There are 13 different varieties in there, a mixture of grasses and legumes and herbs. They grow thickly and they do amazing things to the soil. So we're going to get more of that seed and use it as a catch crop in beds that are in between market crops and as a soil building cover crop as we move into fall. It includes mung beans, common vetch, Indian head lentils, Persian clover, berseem clover, white wonder millet, brown top millet, spring oats, barley, flax, safflower, phacelia, and black oil sunflower. The same company puts out this garden cover mix, which is less expensive and doesn't have as many varieties in it. We may get some of that too in order to stretch our budget a little bit. Now we've come to the post-solstice hibernal garden crops, and here are some of the features. Our winter wheat is a program. This is going to be our third season with wheat. We did a summer wheat last year that we had some problems with. And then in mid-August, we planted our first crop of Banatka as a winter wheat. So it's overwintering. It should be ready to harvest in mid to late July. And then shortly after the solstice, we'll be planting next year's crop of winter wheat. The Banatka is a variety that's been bred from a couple of heritage landrace wheats and by somebody that lives pretty close to us here, Coleraine, Massachusetts, works for the University of Massachusetts. It's a very beautiful variety. It has a tall growth habit and heads that have long, what do they call the little hairs that grow out of the heads of wheat and that hang over. So it's just really a pretty wheat. Would have decorative purposes even if we didn't get enough to grind for flour. Another thing we plant soon after solstice is our fall onions. And the variety we'll do is candy. We'll grow these from sets, and that'll give us a late fall harvest of these lovely sweet onions. They're not great keepers, but they're a really nice sweet onion. And then our storage carrots will go in about that time too. This is a biodynamic variety that's been bred for many years that we are looking forward to trying. It has excellent storage capacity. The ones in the picture here that are from the seed catalog were supposedly came straight out of cold storage after being in there for all winter. So they were taken out in March and they still look pretty good. So if we can get anything keeping quality like that, I'll be really pleased. We'll do a couple of different turnips for fall too. This Purple Prince and the Hackeri turnips, which are a standard fall turnip for us. And as I mentioned earlier, we're excited to be launching into the true shallot world with French red shallots. And so once we get these going, we'll be growing our own bulbs for replanting every year, and they'll be handled pretty much like garlic. Finally, the last thing that happens in the fall is getting our winter low tunnels planted. We have 2 tunnels. One we plant for late fall crops that we can harvest up until Thanksgiving or so. And the other one we plant late with early spring crops. So those are overwintered things that just barely get started, go dormant through the winter, and then take off on their own as soon as the day length increases in the early spring. Take some special varieties to grow under those cold conditions. And so we have picked some particularly hardy lettuce varieties. This one is an Italian butter lettuce. It's new to me. I will be trying it for the first time. Mall's Philadelphia butter is also new to me, but I love that little reddish tinge and the crinkly leaves on that. So it's a nice contrast with the other winter lettuce varieties that I'm familiar with. This one is Winter Density, which is the winter lettuce that I'm most familiar with. I've grown it for many years as a market garden crop. And that brings us to the end of our seed selections. Yeah, the main infrastructure trial that we're running this year has to do with controlling plants in our pathways so that we can keep the pathways clear. And I did some research. This was triggered by by a Facebook group that I've been following on growing cut flowers for market, the cut flower market, and they use this kind of horizontal trellising all the time to control flowers that tend to fall over if they're not supported in some way. And I thought that would be a technique that would help me keep my garden beds under control. So our pathways are only 18 inches wide, and if the plants get out into the pathways, it makes it hard to walk in them. And now that we're doing the living pathways, and there are going to be plants growing there, I want to make sure they get adequate sunlight too. So tutoring refers to controlling the growing habit of plants. It's an old term that I found all the way back into the early 1800s, late 1700s in old horticultural books. And so I just grabbed the term here because it is a way to describe the project and what we're trying to do. So we can't wait to get out in the garden, to get all these seeds in the ground, and to start practicing and putting our new ideas into practice. Look forward to seeing anybody that can make it over to the garden to visit and talk to you about how things develop. Look forward to seeing you there soon.